As Veterans Day is approaching again, it's a day of stories. It's a day of stories about our country. It's a day of appreciation for our veterans. But I want to take some time now to talk about a story that we didn't hear much about. In fact, at the time and shortly thereafter, and sometimes for a longer time than necessary, it was an untold story. It was secret. And we have someone that was part of that secret right here. Anne Seeley is joining us. She will now talk about things that she couldn't talk about for a long time. That's the story of real heroes that we had in our country that went unnoticed. Members of our military, in Anne's case the Navy, but also civilians that worked with our military trying to decode the German code, the Nazi code, and the Japanese code. They were real heroes. They saved lives. They shortened the war. They helped also, I believe, our own soldiers when they had to communicate through secret code as well. So Anne, you're here now. You live in the Cape in South Yarmouth.
Yes.
And I came across you. We were talking, and you told me some of your background, and I said, that's the most fascinating thing. There's been little that's been said about it, but now there's even books coming out. Liz Mundy, a best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author, is doing one on code girls.
Yeah.
It's really a story of breaking the code, but it's also a story about women as well. So can I take you back, if you will, to the days that you attended Smith College?
Yes.
In Northampton. You chose Smith for what reason?
I could have been influenced by the fact that my mother had gone there.
I would say that's a good reason. And you were there.
But I also applied to places like Swarthmore. But I decided on Smith, yeah. And I never regretted it. It was a wonderful education and a wonderful time.
And it really was the background for where you ended up as someone. Now, what's the right word? Is it a cryptographer?
No.
All right.
Let me see.
Cryptologist?
What happened was, you remember Pearl Harbor?
Yes.
Which was in December of '41. I was a senior. And almost immediately, I was recruited along with about 10 or more other girls to take part in a training of cryptography. And it was totally secret and hush-hush. We had to meet at night in a vacant biology lab with a teacher who knew no more than we did. But there was a program, and we followed the program. And the main thing was, don't mention anything about where you were going.
How could you keep that secret in college with all the other students around?
Yeah, because you had to. And that was just the beginning of
So where did you say you were going, if someone asked?
You know, I don't remember now what I said, but it was a lie.
Now, what did you say to your family? You couldn't talk to your family about this either.
No. I never told anybody about the training part of it.
That was quite a journey for you, though.
Yeah.
Because when you got to Smith at a certain point, you really embraced a Quaker-type religion, and you were active in the peace movement when you got there.
I was, but I gradually changed a lot of those things, and Pearl Harbor made a huge impression on all of us.
Well, you were studying international relations as
I
well.
was.
So you were watching what the Nazis were doing?
Actually, no, I don't think I was.
No?
I don't think I was.
Well, really, it was Pearl Harbor that was the breakthrough.
Well, I was because of Berlin Diary and other books like that. But I was focused on a lot of other things. that had to do with history and literature and art. And
Well, with Smith, too, it's important because they were empowering women at the same time. I think when you were there, you were the first woman that was a cabinet secretary that came to the school to speak to you?
Eleanor Roosevelt came
Eleanor Roosevelt came.
and spoke to us, but that was totally different.
Frances Perkins, was she there too? Yes.
I didn't meet her. I would love to have met her. She was wonderful, but I read a lot about her.
But you had a chance to meet Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yes, that was totally separate from anything to do with the war. It was, I was fortunate enough, I was a member of the Democratic Club, and I was on the board of directors of it, and one of the other members was the daughter of this one of the cabinet members. And so through her, we had a visit from him first, and then from Eleanor.
That must have been an amazing experience.
And it was. She was totally unlike the way she was portrayed, with sort of this outlandish kind of voice, and not at all. We had dinner with her, and before the dinner, we met with her in a little room. She talked to each of us about us.
Wow.
And she totally took my heart. And then the next day, of course, she addressed the whole student body.
So the First Lady came and she talked not about herself, but about all of you.
Right, yeah.
And that's what that's Smith being empowering to women.
Yeah.
Clearly the message is there. But
Yeah.
so that was separate from, but pretty great experience to have.
It was one of many wonderful experiences
Now, how did you
that
get,
I had.
there you were in Smith, a great student, performing well, and how did they reach out to you? How did they say, we heard about Anne Seeley and we wanted to, or we heard about this group of people? How did that happen?
Not at all.
No?
I think it came just down to brains. The other people were majored in different things. They just were interested in people who could think and work hard.
Now, how did they find out who they were? From the officials of the college?
From grades.
Oh.
You've heard of those.
So they just, if it was summa cum laude in these areas, they were looking.
That's right.
And you were one of those people.
I was.
What was it like? Did you get contacted by the school, or did they contact you directly? They being,
Directly.
was it the Navy?
It eventually went back to the Navy, yes. But the training part was going to happen. And then at the end, we were asked to, didn't quite join the Navy yet because the waves hadn't been invented, which stands for Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service.
All right. Well, that's
you
about
wondered.
a war is quite an emergency.
Yeah.
So you made that transition, and so there must have been a great camaraderie between you and the other young women that were there, keeping this big secret.
Yes, it was. And when we first went to Washington, we stayed in the same place.
Did you all follow through it, or did any drop out?
Some people declined or dropped out, but this was a huge enterprise. When I first went, we were on Constitution Avenue in a building that been built as a temporary one during World War I. But then the whole communications annex took place out at the edge of town, where American University was, and it was totally fenced around, guarded day and night, and it had room for thousands of people. Because ours was not the only code. It was called JN25.
It was a Japanese code?
It was a Japanese code. And it was a numerical code, 5-digit code number, could stand for a word, a phrase, a kanji. But in addition to that code, there was what we called a cipher, which was an additive group that was added to that code group before it was sent out.
And that's to help camouflage, but also to signal when the code starts and when it stops?
It did do that, but it made it harder for us, and the people who were receiving it had to have a code book and an additive book, of course. And there were very complicated ways of determining where in the additive book the message would.
Now, did you have any idea when you were doing this? Did you just deal strictly with the code and deciphering the code? Did you have any idea, or did they give you information? This is a code that's being transmitted to civilians in the U.S. or to other military people. Did you have any? You were never told that.
Well, no. And we were cogs in a big machine.
So you would, to set the scene, you were living in D.C., in an apartment? Did they help you?
Started in an apartment, and then I later lived in a house with 7 other girls.
And would they take you, would they supply the transportation to this
No.
facility? You would just walk down Constitutional Ave?
Yeah, at first it was doing that.
But then this other big
Then it
building.
was taking the wonderful streetcar system.
Now, you said there were thousands of people that were part of this in this one facility?
Yes, but not all working on JN25. And in the room, which was really 3 rooms that I reported to on 3 different watches, 8 to 4.
Now,
4 to,
how many of the people were women that were working on this?
at the beginning, there weren't so many, but we were gradually replacing men. And I never did. I think we could go to was a place in Australia and maybe a place in Hawaii also where we had a unit, but I stayed in Washington.
And they would give you one code to be working on. And did you,
What
now
I-
that this is all, you can tell your story now.
Yeah.
How successful were you?
When I, well, we were very successful. But of course, whenever a ship of theirs or an island was taken, they would realize the code was compromised, so they would change it. But it became harder and harder for them to do it because they had to get the material to the people who were sending and receiving. This was all over.
So you would work on this, and then they would change it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's...
That was to be expected. And that was actually kind of more fun than when we had broken into it and we were just kind of, for the sake of history, filling in additives. what we would be given when we came to work was a kind of book about this big. This is one page. At the top is additive, 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 additive. And the lines underneath are messages, 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 messages. And the quickest way to know whether your additive was right was the fact that they had to scan these 5-digit groups, had to add up to something divisible by 3. The purpose of that was so that they could detect garbles, which did occur. But if a lot of garbles occurred,
Now, a garble would be what?
something that didn't
Come through.
didn't divide by 3.
Wow. So you had this, and you started this as a civilian, and you
Yes.
were in Washington working these
Yeah.
long hours,
Yes.
and you couldn't tell your family.
No,
So what did you tell them?
I said I was working in naval communications.
Well, that's the truth.
It was the truth.
So you didn't lie to your parents.
No, people, that's what we told everybody. And I think most of them assumed that we were sending messages of our own.
But did you know what the other people in the groups were doing? Did you discuss that perhaps afterwards socially? And you couldn't say, did you know that when some of them, was there a moment when someone had a pretty big breakthrough and everyone was celebrating?
No,
Because you couldn't even
no.
talk among each other,
We could talk among the people that were in our room,
just in that room.
but that was it. And we had a watch officer in charge of each watch, and it was always.
Was there a particular moment when that you can remember in particular, besides doing this every day and deciphering things? Was there ever a moment that you'll never forget, like one moment doing this?
I don't think so. I think, of course, it was exciting whenever you recovered an additive.
Yes.
And if things were going well, you might recover 10 or 15 of them in a night.
Wow.
And then your watch officer would sign that he agreed.
Wow. And there really weren't computers back then,
That's right.
so it was your mind that was necessary.
There were rudimentary computers that could add and subtract a lot of things from each other, and that was a necessary part of it.
Now, did you go through this, through the whole course of the war?
Yes.
Wow, that's a lot of deciphering.
Yes. It was also very exciting to live in Washington, D.C. during the war.
I think that most people wouldn't realize it was a woman that first got the message that the Japanese had surrendered, a woman by the name of Virginia Adderholt, and she was decoding things from the Japanese to the Swiss, who were working to broker a peace, and she decoded the actual surrender before the President of the United States knew about it.
Wonderful.
And she did that, and they gave the message to the president. So it was pretty exciting stuff back then.
It was.
And you enjoyed your time in Washington. Did you stay in Washington afterwards? What did you do after the war?
Well, during the course of the war, I became engaged to be married. So that was pretty easy.
So you weren't doing this all night then? You weren't just doing codes all night?
Well, the guy that I was getting engaged to was not in Washington most of the time, so more or less by correspondence. So I was free to have my own social life.
Yeah.
But
And we know you're very good at keeping a secret. So.
yeah, yeah.
And so you became engaged, and then how soon after did you get married and move away?
immediately.
No.
In fact, I almost didn't get out in time for the wedding. They enlisted people had to pass exams to get promoted. Officers just had to keep their nose clean for a certain amount of time. And so I went in as an ensign, then I became a lieutenant JG, and then I became a full lieutenant. And every time that happened, you had to get a physical. And so I went to the Bethesda Naval Hospital for my physical. And somehow, I guess I didn't go straight to the hospital. Some little thing came up that made them think they had to check me out in the hospital. So they did, and turned out it was all right. But they lost my papers. Oh. So when I was able to come back to where I was living, that was fine. The wedding was all set. That was fine. But would I get out in time?
You didn't want to leave your
the
fiancé
wedding,
at the altar.
The wedding was January 5th. I got out on the day before Christmas.
It's cutting it close.
It was cutting it close.
Now, you were given instructions even after you left the Navy, not to speak about this, is that right?
Oh, absolutely.
So you couldn't discuss this with your husband? As far as he knew, you were just in communications in the Navy?
You know, I guess that's probably right.
And so, did you ever get notified to say, all right, it's okay to talk about this now? Or?
Yes, an article came out in Time magazine. And I don't remember, that was several years after the war. By that time, that wasn't anything that was on the top of my mind anyhow.
No. But it's amazing that for all these years, people were able to keep these secrets about what went on. And your advancement was not that common, was it, to become a lieutenant and move up from the enlisted area that well as a woman?
I didn't go in enlisted.
Okay.
An ensign is an officer.
So you went in as the officer,
yeah.
so you didn't have
there
to
were enlisted waves as well, but they didn't get indoctrinated, as they called it, at Smith.
Yeah.
When I did get into the Navy, I went right back to Smith, which is where the indoctrination took place.
I see, yeah.
And it normally took 3 months. But I was detached early because I was needed doing what I was doing. And to tell the truth, indoctrination is not much.
You had to just jump right in.
Yeah.
And deal with it.
Yeah.
And so how long did you leave? You know, the war ended, you were getting married. It was at that point that you left the Navy and were in civilian life?
It's true that we couldn't actually resign for quite a while, but by the time we did, it wasn't any bother to me. I knew. I did worry a little bit when the Korean War came along. Would we be recalled because we had not been allowed to resign?
I see.
But fortunately, that didn't happen. So then I went on to have a totally different life.
And that part, now when you did and were able to tell your husband or your family
Yeah.
what were you doing, what you were doing, were they astonished with that? Did they?
It didn't make much of an impression on me.
It didn't? Well, it should have.
Yeah.
But maybe they knew you pretty well by then, and nothing would surprise them.
It may be me that I don't remember it now.
Yeah.
It probably did make an impression.
And so today, when you look back, when Veterans Day approaches, or we have some, what do you think back? What goes through your mind during that time? Do you remember hearing the news about the end of World War II? Or do you remember, do you reflect on some of that experience and look at some of the new? You know, when I have the opportunity to go visit our troops, it's amazing to see women in jobs that they never had before.
Right.
You know, I served with in Congress with a woman who's now a U.S. senator who was in, you know, flying helicopters and was wounded in that process. But it's amazing now to see the opportunities that women have in our military. But how do you reflect back when you, on a day like Veterans Day, is there any particular thought that goes through your mind?
Well, one thought that goes through it is that women's move toward equality, was brought about largely by the war, not only in the military, but factory jobs, all kinds of jobs.
My mother worked in World War II in Plymouth Rubber, and they were doing work to help the military cause go forward too. So I understand, and my own family, my own mother, and I'll say this in closing: you're working on that Japanese code and helping, particularly our Navy people in the Pacific. My dad was a Seabee during that time in the Pacific, and so I want to thank you for the work that you did, supporting all those great people that did so well, helping us of a generation that I think no one will question is the greatest generation. And so it's great to talk to someone who served during that period, helped our country, and now can talk about it, which they couldn't back then. So, so Anne, thank you for sharing all this, and it's really an incredible story and a transformative story, not just about our country and about you know, historical effects of World War II, but also, as you mentioned, transformative to women. They were in factories and businesses and in the military themselves. And it was a period, we should remember that as well. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thanks for being here. Thanks for people that are enjoying the history that you're involved with today, transferring that information around the Bass River area. And thank you for being here. It's a delight.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I hope everyone that had the opportunity to see this or hear this enjoyed experiencing an important Veterans Day story, an historic part of our history. And I want to thank all veterans who gave so much for their country and remind them that we're here to help as well. People can go to our website at keating.house.gov or call us at 1-800-870-2626. Call us if we can help you at all. If you're having problems with the Veterans Administration or you need information, feel free to call us. We're there to help.